Eastern Partnership, and we are very thankful for this opportunity and for your support. Madam Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Renata, for introducing me, for giving me the floor. Thank you to all participants that you get together to discuss this important topic. And indeed, I'm very pleased that our ministry could provide support. It shows how important we find both the Eastern Partnership and cooperation between think tanks, NGOs, civil society from Eastern Partnership countries. And I think the title that I saw for today's seminar, In Search of Success Stories, is a very good title because that's what we need to keep doing. Polarization, unfortunately, it's here in Georgia, it's possibly in your countries where I'm not, it may be on the rise in the Netherlands, and it's very harmful. It's in the way towards more compromise and solution-focused politics. So I think the first success story is actually your three organizations working together: the Georgian Institute of Politics, the Institute for European Policies and Reforms from Moldova, and the Analytical Center on Globalization and Regional Cooperation from Armenia. I think your cooperation and your brainstorming and your looking for solutions is a prime example of what I think politicians should be doing, because we need a multi-party democracy, we need a change in political culture where people are willing to compromise and work together. And your work brings together not only civil society, but also policymakers, politicians, experts. And that, I think, is a very good way to go ahead. And well, being posted in Georgia and following, of course, closely what's going on in Georgia, I think indeed the title of the paper that's going to be discussed on Georgia, Can Georgia Overcome the Polarization Trap? It's a very good title, and I wholeheartedly hope and believe that Georgia can overcome this, both in political culture as when it comes, for instance, to constitutional changes that have been agreed upon in Georgia, and that I think should remain on the agenda. But I'm only welcoming you. I'm not here to speak a lot about Georgia. I just wanted to really very much thank you for your efforts. And I do hope you find those success stories. I know they are there, and that altogether we can work on keeping the reform process going that's going on in all our countries to the benefit of the people of our countries who deserve to be well represented in parliament, in politics. So I'm again happy for your thoughts. I may not be able to stay with you during the whole seminar, but we wholeheartedly support you, and I hope to stay in touch now, but also after this very important seminar. So thank you again, Renata. Thank you, participants, and I wish you a good exchange of thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your welcoming remarks and support. Indeed, this is today's topic has touched all three target countries especially in the last half a year through our election cycles and multiple crises, but also there have been some positive experiences that we will hear about today. And now I would like to give floor to Dr. Stepan Grigorian, who is the chairman of the board of the Analytical Center on Globalization and Regional Cooperation from Armenia. So Dr. Stepan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good day. Dear colleagues, dear friends, Her Excellency Ambassador one called them. As mentioned by Renata, the project is initiated by our organizations from three countries, and we would like to thank the government of the Netherlands for support. This is second online workshop titled Assessing Polarization in the Eastern Partnership Countries. This topic is important for most of the Eastern Partnership countries, and in the framework of this project, the prepared papers will analyze the situation in our three countries, Armenia, Moldova, and Georgia. And I would like to thank Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Armenia, Nico Sermers, for his participation. And finally, thank you for your attention and wishing all of us the productive workshop.
Thank you very much. Well, without much further ado, then I will turn to our third partner, Julian Groza, from Institute for European Policies and Reforms, Moldova, for his welcoming remarks, and he will also be moderating the discussion today. So please feel free to engage actively in the chat and in the Q&A, and to write your questions, your comments. And actually, I see that Corneli Kakacea has also joined from GIP. So maybe Julian, you would be also willing to give him a few words afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renata. Thank you for putting together this online workshop. It's the second workshop that we organized together in the framework of our regional project. The issue of polarization, indeed, is a topic widely present in the region of the Eastern Partnership. And I think the exercise of assessment of this challenging phenomenon in the region by the example of our three countries may provide some lessons learned, but also some developments that would help the key stakeholders in our countries, development partners, EU in general, as we are looking to the upcoming Eastern Partnership Summit, and the resilience of our societies is one of the buzzword, but also the main goal of the next intervention, next policies, which will be supported by the European Union in the region. So indeed, the topic is very interesting, and I'm really happy that we managed to get already a number of assessments done by our partners, by our colleagues. Before turning to our panelists and experts that would share their assessments during this workshop, indeed, I would like to invite Dr. Corneli Kakacea for short intro remarks, welcoming remarks as a host of this event. Corneli, please.
Thank you, Julian. I would like to welcome you again on behalf of GIP, and I would like to say a few words about the project and why this is important for the three countries which were involved. As you know, three countries, Armenia, Moldova, and Georgia, they are members of Eastern Partnership Initiative, and Moldova and Georgia are associated partners, and Armenia also has a special treaty with EU. So all of them actually emerging democracy, I would say, which and of course three countries actually have some problems in terms of democratization and Europeanization process. So I think this topic which we choose for this project is very timely, because at least two countries, what I know from the preliminary research, have this problem with the polarization, which actually hampers the democratization process. And not only, it also hampers the stability of the country, and all the energy which we should spare for the reforms, especially in terms of democratization and further Europeanization of this region, actually goes to the internal fighting. At least this is a case in Georgia, which is very unfortunate, and I'm sure we can hear some other stories from other partner countries. But in terms of Georgia, I would say Georgia is also, as we all know, was front runner in the Eastern Partnership for some time. I'm not sure if it is still holds though, because of this democratic backsliding which we see recent years in Georgia. It's of course it doesn't mean that because of this polarization we have to stop our efforts, especially in terms of democratization of the country, and also to beef up our reforms. But I think what we also need the experience sharing, because each country has unique experience in terms of polarization. Sometimes it, even though we may think that our case is very unique and it may not be compared to another country, it's not like that. Sometimes we actually facing same challenges, and that's why we need especially civil society think tanks to share this experience, and also to initiate some publication which gives further, I would say, details to the general public, and also the international community. So I think that was one of the aim of this project, and I'm really happy that we managed to work it together with our Armenian and Moldovan partners. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Corneli, and thank you for the partnership with you and for this initiative. Now, let me turn to the panelists with your permission and start the discussion. Let me invite first Larissa Minasyan. Larissa worked and assessed the polarization in post-electoral Armenia, looking at the effects on good governance and democratization processes. Larissa is a former executive director of Open Society Foundations in Armenia. Larissa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues. It's really remarkably refreshing to be again with you and see everyone in good health, and particularly my long-standing partner and colleague, Cornelius Kakache. Indeed, thank you for this event and inviting to this discussion. I cannot agree more to previous remarks on how pertinent this topic to today's Armenia and in general to the world. And unfortunately, I won't be able to share good examples to learn from, but probably some lessons to be aware, and would very much look forward to your questions and hopefully suggestions how we can work on the topic in Armenia and cooperate along that. So my main point would be that polarization, political polarization primarily, and turning into societal polarization to some extent, has derailed Armenian very demanding and very promising democratic transformation ever since from the revolution, and continues to play a very damaging role in current situation, to the extent that if not turned into very serious transformative reforms amidst this polarization, a very dire alternative of consolidation of power through undemocratic means is possible in current Armenia. So to start with, I will start with some years back to give you the perspective, but we'll hope to do that very quickly. So for decades before the revolution, Armenian society at large was highly alienated from any political process, very mistrustful, if not cynical, of the institutions and political process. Then the reasons for this were ample. This was a very systemically corrupt state with captured institutions, and with notoriously fraudulent elections where people's voice was not heard or honored. So the alienated society was very unlikely to perform what it did during the revolution, namely coming together in very confident and very united front, I should say, particularly around democratic asks, very democratic asks of justice, accountability, and dignity. Even more surprising was the fact that this unity continued, and it really turned into determination to get to the change through maybe lengthy and very difficult process, because people at large did realize how systemically the country was damaged through this corruption. So, this unity, how remarkable it was indeed very well understood by the ousted former regime and revanchist, still revanchist representatives, by some powers outside the country. And indeed, this unity and this determination for change and tolerance for change was attacked primarily in the very early days of the revolution. So while the majority of population, overwhelming majority of the population was very supportive of this change, and nothing predicted that polarization in society, and it didn't happen initially. The politics behaved differently. The government, the very new government, unfortunately succumbed to this divisive and very intolerant rhetoric, very attacks on particularly democracy and change, juxtaposing manipulations, juxtaposing democracy and national security, democracy and national identity. I mean, you know the jab. So, and instead of really engaging in much needed and much expected transformative reform, it went step by step into something that couldn't either deliver the change or persuade the population on consistency and capacity of the government to perform that change. Even though it wasn't very hopeless until the crisis struck and the war started, which plunged Armenia into obviously very deep political crisis with this polarization that actually based its narrative on security and juxtaposing it to democracy. The snap elections were meant to resolve this crisis, and in some ways one would imagine, and we all expected that it did, because even in this dire situation, the population that was devastated by this war in ways more than one, that faced crises including COVID and humanitarian crisis, justice crisis, security crisis, it did still support the change through rejecting the basically old regime anew. Unfortunately, through this very polarized situation, the small parties, the democratic small parties, didn't manage to unite and present some counterbalance to this pose. And currently in the Armenian parliament, there are exactly these two poles: the government that came to the power after the revolution and the revanchist opposition that has nothing to offer but really divisive and very poisonous rhetoric. So, and yet, given the support of the populace, one would have expected that the government will still be very determined on much of the incomplete reform agenda. However, unfortunately, this multiple of the processes, there's multiple of the challenges: security challenge, increasingly worsening security challenge, and dysfunctional government, dysfunctional governmental institutions. The government chose to again not engage into decisive change, but again succumb to this insult trading and accusation throwing around the parliament. And outside the parliament, the way it deals with this crisis is exactly what is concerning for many of us in civil society. Particularly in foreign policy, its reliance on one sole partner, and if not denial, then reservation to internationalized conflict resolution, even given the situation where this partner cannot or does not want to ensure the security, really undermines not only the internal trust towards government's institution and its main function to provide security to its citizens, but also undermines the international standing of Armenia, where the country literally delegates its sovereign functions to a third party. And security poses really an existential threat, now more so than at the time that I was basically working on the paper. In the internal politics, it's no less positive in a way. In what sense? That indeed not reformed dysfunctional institutions are not capable to really interact and face the enormously exchanged challenges of the post-war. So, basically, to perform the governing functions more than it should, the government resorts to law enforcement and security agencies, the exact agencies that have not been transformed, have not been reformed for not a decade, but probably two. And we see more and more this consolidation of governing functions, not through democratic means, but through, on the contrary, undemocratic means. Unfortunately, this extends beyond practice, and there are even new pieces of legislation in curtailing free speech, and new cases of attacks on civil society activists that really are concerning for current situation. It is indeed unfortunate that this security predicament, this increased role of Russia, comes at an expense of really the forces, the presence of the forces that are advocating for democratic change and supporting democratic change. Because in post-war vulnerability of security situation is much manipulated by the opposition, very destructive opposition rhetoric that really presents this democratization revolution as the threat to security. So what is basically a potential here, that again, the majority of population will get very mistrustful of the process, very alienated, particularly that the situation, humanitarian situation, is not improving very quickly. And once again, we will have a situation where two polarized minorities perform the political duties, and the rule is not the rule of majority. The majority is really alienated from the process. So how to stop this? It is really of paramount importance to consolidate power, to consolidate the governance. However, the only alternative, the only way to do so is really to transform and to perform very hardcore, deep democratic transformation of the institutions. However, here comes catch-22. In the current security situation, that is probably not possible unless and until the conflict settlement is accountable and within the international law and justice, rather than delegated to a single country's mercy. So as a precondition to consolidating democratic rule, consolidating whatever democratic gains had there been before the revolution, is really to internationalize the conflict resolution and provide accountable peace settlement. In parallel with that, not after that, it is of a very serious concern and importance that both internally, through civil society, through advocates, through media, through policy centers, and externally through democratic partners of the country, it is really flagged that undemocratic means of consolidation of power and dealing with the problems is really a dead end for the country. And here the role of the Western partners, the civil society in the country, media and policy institutes is indeed very important. And this should be supported to mount very urgent, very needed the debate and discourse on urgent, maybe at some point even existential problems that the country faces. So here would be my kind of stop in a way that indeed continuing of this very minimalistic type of reformation is not going to be sufficient to face democratically the challenges that the country has. So I would be happy to answer your questions and elaborate, and as I will be very happy to hear your comments and maybe arguments to this premise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Larissa, for this comprehensive presentation. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions during the Q&A session. Now, let me turn to Chisinau, to Moldova. I mean, our region is very much exposed to hybrid warfare interference. We have seen disinformation, we have seen hate speech, we have seen politicians and proxies of other actors here in Moldova using geopolitical narratives to divide society, usually during the election, but not only, also when important developments are taking place or reforms are started to be implemented. We have seen also various politicians, kleptocrats, trying to divert the attention of the public and the support from the reform agenda towards, again, issues that can separate, can divide, can polarize the society. Though Moldova has provided a number of lessons learned from this context, and we had a track record which indicates some improvements in terms of the immunization of the population towards polarization. Mihai has assessed this short history, but also trying to give some thoughts in terms of how to further discourage the polarization and the instigation to divisive agenda in the country. Mihai is team leader here at IPRE, the representation program. Mihai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you very much for organizing this event and this discussion. I think it's a very interesting topic. It's a very relevant topic for Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia, especially in the current political context. And I think it's a very good opportunity kind of to switch the topics from the last event that we organized within this project about the post-electoral context in our countries now to the polarization, which comes usually as a consequence of the electoral processes, of the political processes, of the political discourses in many countries across Europe, but not only. I would refer to some very let's say very narrow issues related to the ethnic polarization in Moldova. I selected 3 issues that, from my view, are the ones who are triggering kind of the ethnic polarization in Moldova, and I'll try to refer briefly to them. And I also shared with you in the chat the link to the analysis that we published on this topic in English. So feel free to read it. It's a short analysis, but will give you maybe some information on the Moldovan case. So I'll just start by mentioning the fact that the ethnic composition of the Moldovan society is shared by Moldovans, who are the major ethnic group. 75% of the citizens, of the Moldovan citizens, consider themselves as Moldovans. 25% are ethnic minorities, from which 7% are Romanians, 6% are Ukrainians, and 4.5% are Russians, and another 4.5% are Gagauz minority. So basically, this would be the most important ethnic groups in the country, based on the regional component, based on the territorial component, the minorities are kind of located both in the north and the south of Moldova. Especially in the north, we have especially a group of Ukrainian and Russian ethnics located in the very north of the country. And in the south, we have a region, autonomous region called Gagauzia, in which, as I previously mentioned, is located the Gagauz minority, but also some other minorities, especially Bulgarians, Russians, and so on. We have also another region in the country, a small local public administration district populated by the Bulgarian minority. So across Moldova, we can see that actually the minorities are living in different regions, but in the same time, they are not separated from the Moldovan minority, from the Moldovan ethnic majority. And they are quite well integrated actually in the society, and they live in peace and mutual understanding between each other. But in the same time, of course, there are some issues related to this topic, and I will try to refer to 3 of them, as I mentioned before. The first one is the political discourse in Moldova, aimed at division of the electorate, especially in the first 25 years after the independence, until last maybe 2 or 3 years, Moldova had confronted with the issue of political discourse, especially the electoral discourse aimed at division and polarization of the electorate, but mostly focused actually on geopolitical division. The politicians here in Moldova tried to convince the electorate to vote for one party or another based on their geopolitical preferences, instead of focusing the discourse on the internal policy issues in Moldova. In this way, they created kind of a they influence kind of the polarization of the society, in a sense that on the one side you had a public, a group of people that were very much looking and were the supporters of the pro-European discourse, and on the other side you had a discourse that was focusing on a more deeper cooperation with Russia, and you had a public that were mostly a fan of the pro-Russian discourse, pro-Russian geopolitical discourse. And of course, the polarization of the society based on the political discourse had an influence on the people mindset and created to some extent some debates within the society, within sometimes within families, within neighbors maybe, about their geopolitical preferences and the geopolitical discourse. But in the last years, we saw a good kind of an optimistic change in this regard. The results of the last parliamentary elections, for example, in July 2021 are a proof of the setback recorded by the thesis of the geopolitical vote. For example, in the Gagauz region that I mentioned before, where 95% of the population belongs to the ethnic minority groups, the turnout of the parliamentary elections, the participation in the parliamentary elections was about 13% lower than a year before during the presidential elections. And that was because the party that was voted, usually voted in this region, the Party of Socialists and their partners, the Party of Communists, that actually advocated for a very for a geopolitical discourse. Even in this campaign, their party obtained about 15% less votes than a year before. And that was because, especially during the last parliamentary elections, we had the party who won the elections, the Party of Action and Solidarity, actually promoted a discourse that was mostly based on a theme important for the people, but important for the internal policies of the country. They promoted the ideas to fight against corruption, to ensure the independence of the justice system, to basically develop and increase the well-being of the Moldovan people. And this is an indicator that the geopolitical discourse in Moldova is decreasing in the last years. And we hope that this trend will be kept in the next years, because it's important for the Moldovan society to be part of an electoral competition, or to be included in an electoral debate based on internal policies of the country, based on development plans for the country, but especially focused on the internal policies and not only on the foreign discourse. Another important issue that I wanted to mention related to the polarization trends is related to the disinformation problem. The disinformation issue is, of course, very common for Eastern Europe, for the Eastern Partnership countries, I think for Georgia and Armenia as well. But in the case of Moldova, it's even more important, because we can see, according to the surveys and according to the polls, that based on the language that people speak, there are some disinformation trends that occur, or maybe have a bigger impact on the Russian-speaking, for example, minorities or the Russian-speaking community, than on the ones who are part of the major ethnic group, of the Moldovan ethnic group. And this is happening because more than 80% of the Moldovan society is informing or follows the news from the TV stations and is using the TV stations as a primary source of information. From the data that we had from the most recent surveys, we can see, for example, that 90% of the inhabitants of the Gagauz region or Taraklia district, populated by the Bulgarian minority, are informed by the Russian language media sources. And of course, this is kind of this is having an impact on the trust that these people have, for example, in the Russian media. More than 62% of the inhabitants say that they have a very high confidence in the Russian media, and only 38% say that they trust the local media or the national media. I think that based on this data, we can say that the Russian media, for example, has a bigger influence on the ethnic community on the Russian-speaking community in the country, while on the Moldovan community, for example, the trends are a bit different. However, I think that the disinformation trends that are now very easily to see and to perceive in Moldova are having an important impact on the information that the people get, especially on the sources from which they inform. And here we are speaking about, as I told you, Russian TV stations. We are speaking about talk show news programs and entertainment programs that mostly come from the Russian Federation. And in this context, of course, it's very hard kind of to fight against disinformation, and mostly to inform in a proper way, maybe offer fair information, kind of offer access to independent media resources, especially to the ethnic minority groups who are now following, especially the Russian media. And the Russian TV channels. And I think a third issue that is important for Moldova nowadays are the educational programs aimed at facilitating the studying of both the national language and the ethnic minorities languages. I think in Moldova, it's important now to strengthen our efforts, both from a budgetary point of view, but also from a policy point of view, in order to increase the access of people to the educational programs, to the studying of languages, especially in those areas where ethnic minorities are residing, and to facilitate their access to study both their ethnic language, kind of the language representing their ethnicity, but also to studying the Romanian language and have access, for example, to get a job in the public administration system at the national level. Why not? And I have a few recommendations to make, especially to the national authorities, but also important for the civil society and for developing partners of the country. Of course, the first one is related to develop our national strategy, our policies towards combating polarization on ethnic grounds. And on ethnic criteria. I think here we need the joint efforts of the parliament, the government, and the institutions involved in the supervising and monitoring the activity of the media, but also of the electoral bodies. And I think that nowadays, in the context in which we have kind of the representatives of one party in the lead positions in the government, in the parliament, but also in the presidency. We can facilitate this dialogue between the institutions to work on this, on the implementation of the strategy and the implementation of the national policy. I think it's important for Moldova to set some clear criteria for defining and investigating the discourse of division or instigating to division during the electoral campaigns. The electoral body in Moldova has limited power to act in this direction, because at the political level, the legislation needs to be changed in order to facilitate or to offer more tools for the electoral bodies to monitor and sanction the actors who are using the geopolitical discourse, the discourse aimed at division of the electorate. I think at the same time it's important for the Audiovisual Council, the authority responsible for monitoring the activity of the media, to ensure an effective monitoring and sanctioning of the violations committed by radio and TV broadcasters, but also it's important to us to assess and look at the experiences of other countries that were and are fighting against external disinformation, especially the Russian propaganda, the Russian disinformation trends, and kind of acquire and learn from their experience what is needed to be done in order to increase the transparency, to increase the level of fair information, fair news that get to the people living in Moldova, including to the ethnic minorities that, as I told you before, are more let's say affected maybe by the disinformation trends based on the data that we get from the polls and from the surveys.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll just finish with the last remark that for Moldova in this case, I would say that the experience of Georgia and Armenia could be relevant, but more important, I think, is to develop across the Eastern Partnership, why not, a framework of cooperation maybe best practices, of learning from the best practices of the European Union in this regard, because the EU is also working very actively nowadays to fight against the disinformation, propaganda, and of course ethnic polarization because of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mihai. Thank you for this detailed presentation of your assessment and also coming up with concrete recommendations. Now let me turn to Georgia. Nino Samkharadze is a junior policy analyst at the Georgian Institute of Politics. Nino has analyzed also the aspect of polarization from the perspective of political culture. And Nino, please, you have the floor and share your answers if Georgia can overcome the polarization trend.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me share this small slides which I have prepared for visualization of my main findings, if I may. Here it is, and also let me start with joining to my colleagues in thanking to the Dutch Embassy for giving us the opportunity to discuss this crucially important and very much timely topic about the polarization, like cross-country comparisons and discussions, which I think is really important in terms of creating the overall regional context. How can we be on the same line with our specific challenges in our states? And for now, let me share our experience in Georgia in terms of how we see here our polarization, political and public polarization and how can we, or if we can overcome the polarization trap in Georgia. So first of all, we have to say that in Georgia, we have the polarization as the most frequently mentioned explanatory factor of kind of endless crisis in the country, endless political crisis in the country. I think that we mostly started talking about polarization in Georgia in terms of how it looks and how it is like practiced by the political parties, by the political societies and media outlets and etc. But we have to say that the main particularity of Georgian polarization is that Georgian political parties usually avoid to address the ideological differences or policy related differences or different visions they have about different like practical challenges, which is Georgia facing currently, right, such as democratic reforms or fighting against pandemic and etc. So those practical issues go beyond the like consensus-based politics or beyond the discussion which is oriented on the tangible results for the country. So this is main implication and main distinct marker of Georgian political polarization, which is very well communicated in especially in the post-electoral reports from international and local units and observers. And also we have to mention that this is not only elections, which we have like from year to year for at least the last 4 years, but we have also inter-electoral period, which also was marked as quite harsh in terms of avoiding any achieving any consensus-based dialogue and at least tradition of dialogue among and between the parties in Georgia. And a very obvious case for this was the inter-party dialogue suggested and brokered by the EU, which at some stage it seemed to be successful in terms of signing the final agreement and agreeing on some points, very crucial points about court reform, about the reform of electoral bodies as well. But at the end of the day, this was still, we could say, the failed result. When it comes especially to the post-2021 local electoral period. If we look at this period, we see that the polarized environment in Georgian politics and society as well is even deepened. So in order to find out how can we escape from this trap in Georgia, we have to look at what exactly drives this polarization, and we have to look at the actor who can somehow play the mitigating role in this process. So in order to imagine how the political polarization proceeds in Georgia, I want to make this contextual information to be visible for the audience, which is about the public nihilism, mostly, which somehow creates the kind of food, like good background for addressing the polarization related problems. So if we look at the public opinion surveys, which was conducted by the ACGRC Georgia in July 2021, we see that more than half of the respondents cannot identify with any of the present parties in Georgian political and party mosaic. And at the same time, from those who show up at the electoral boxes, then their votes mostly are distributed between two dominant parties, when we have like quite big range of political parties in terms of ideological stances, in terms of political biographies, to say so. But mostly we have like more than 70% of the total votes we have distributed between the two dominant parties, which is the ruling Georgian Dream, like GD, and the biggest opposition party, the United National Movement. So mainly the political polarization outfit is driven by those two parties, how their strategies will work on other units which can also influence in political mosaic of Georgia. When we talk about the fueling factors of political polarization, as I mentioned, we do not have here like issue-based or ideology-based or policy-based discussions, and they are usually they are absent from the political discourse in Georgia, and we are witnessing mostly the high degree of radicalization. We have here the Georgian politics as a zero-sum game for the Georgian parties, which means that like the winner takes it all, if we say so, which means that the party which is currently in governmental bodies represented, they do not have the guarantees that after they transfer the power, they will be able to be present, that their voice to be present in Georgian politics again, because we even currently we are witnessing, for example, the rhetoric of ending the opponent, ending the party, kind of, this is mostly like electoral rhetoric of the political parties, but usually even beyond the electoral processes, this is also something that is very salient in Georgian political parties' rhetoric and their wording, to say so, and of course their strategies. And also we have very much personalized political strategies presented by the mostly two dominant parties, and even those concrete figures with the concrete names and surnames are making their impacts also on mobilizing the supporters beyond those two dominant parties, I mean GD and ruling GD and the largest opposition UNM parties, which means that they can also mobilize somehow for and or against something, even the parts of the societies who had been neutral before, for example, or who had been nihilists before, for example, before the elections, I mean, or before the crisis. So those names and surnames run the party mostly, and their presence in so their dominance on the political processes, formally or informally sometimes, is widely criticized from the West, from the actors who know how consensus-based or ideology or issue-based political culture works. And personalization is exactly what hampers this kind of consensus-based politics in Georgia mostly. And lastly, we have radically polarized media environment in Georgia, which is also marked in the different reports, both like local and international reports, especially prior the last local elections of 2021, but usually before all the elections, media gets particularly polarized, which means that, for example, even the TV channels which had maintained neutral or more or less neutral political editorials before, then they started to become more of pro-governmental stance. So this is also increasing and deepening the gap between the two poles in Georgia, and this is exactly media which makes the particular agendas for one or for another side, which also hampers the mitigating the damaging impacts of polarization in Georgia. And by the end of my today's review, I will somehow introduce or at least suggest some of the actors who had actually played sometimes important or sometimes less important roles, but at least they have potential to play a very much significant role in terms of depolarizing the society as well as the political spectrum in Georgia. First of all, this is the Institute of President in Georgia and President Salome Zurabishvili herself for now, because in the recent years, not years, but months, President Salome Zurabishvili has made some balanced rhetoric and balanced statements in order to suggest some platforms to the GD and UNM in order to make those two parties their harsh rhetorics against each other less damageable for the country. And she usually makes those statements in order to show or in order to demonstrate how consensus-based politics is important for Georgia's democratization. But until now, in practice, this institute has not worked in this way so far in terms of dialogue or in terms of providing that tangible platform for the parties. So I think that at least this institute shows the signs of having some resources to play a role in the polarization process in Georgia. So if this institute will be somehow activated in the direction of providing this neutral platform for those parties and political actors in general, to make their attitudes more or less closer with each other, it can be very important precedent in Georgia's political life. President's Institute to be employed as a depolarizating factor. Another really important factor in Georgia, it is small opposition parties, which are like collectively, they are still a big power because small opposition parties usually tend to bandwagon with the bigger ones, but some of them avoid this process. And if this process gets more active, like avoiding bandwagoning with the dominant parties in order to not to disappear their own voice from the both like parliamentary tribunes as well as in different platforms beyond the parliament, for example, they can also play a mitigating role in somehow balancing those two dominant aggressive or radicalized rhetoric which is existing for now in Georgia. This might happen in terms of suggesting trilateral negotiations, for example, initiations, in terms of discussing some concrete issue which is more of national interest rather than narrower party interest. So such kind of steps, if they can be activated by the small opposition parties, it can also mitigate the like damages made by polarization for the Georgia's political environment. And lastly, and I think at this point it is the most salient in Georgia, that international society, the collective West, to say so, both Brussels as well as Washington, but they can somehow, they have a big leverage on Georgia's political spectrum. Georgia has its ambitions, Georgia has its obligations officially in order to advance its Euro integration process. And even the ruling party, for example, it has some concrete plans and concrete ambitions regarding the Euro integration process, which can be used and applied as the leverage from Brussels in order to provide more rigorous efforts in terms of providing, like in terms of closing somehow two different stances, two different poles in Georgian political spectrum closer with each other, and to orient and focus them more on national interests rather than their narrow party strategies. With this, I will stop, and thank you for your attention, and I will be more than glad to answer any questions regarding the issue.
Thank you very much, Nino. Thank you for the presentation. Now, let me turn to our participants and to the panelists at the same time. Let me open the Q&A, the discussion. Just one remark to our attendees in the Zoom. If you have any questions, of course, you can address them in the chat. But if you want to make a comment or you want to intervene, please inform us about that, and we will promote you to a panelist, and you will be able to talk here online with us. In the meantime, I think we have already some of the questions addressed, and yeah, I mean, one question is from Vrej Madoyan. It's addressed to all the panelists. Mihai a bit tried to anticipate this question and try to come up with some recommendations, but the question is, what are the key reasons and the key topic of polarization in our countries? And if you can mention this topic and eventual concrete recommendations to overcome them. Yeah, so this is the question open to all. Who wants to start? Nino, maybe you want to, you basically addressed the topics that you see from your perspective, but maybe you can also kind of answer to this question into more details. And then Larissa, and then Mihai, if you want to add something.
Yes, in terms of naming a topic as such, which is the subject of polarization, as I mentioned, it is something beyond the topic, something beyond the concrete issues, which might be like ideological or concrete policies about the challenges which Georgia is facing currently. I don't know, unemployment, healthcare, such kind of things are mostly beyond the active discussions, at least for now. Mostly for now, we are witnessing this clash of two dominant parties for having their role, having their power employed in Georgian political arena, like fighting for the votes or fighting for example, the leader of the UNM, Mikhail Saakashvili, to be liberated, or fighting in the streets for runoffs, for example, or fighting for the snap elections, or such kind of instruments for grabbing the power is mostly salient in Georgia, rather than like content of the discussion or content or of the issues that can be discussed or can be addressed to be the topic of the polarization as such. So once we move on the topics, when they get the part of the polarization even itself, then we can also address the issue much more easily. But for now, we are more about strategies of the policy making rather than topics. At least this is my perception. And yeah, this was my answer from Georgia.
Larissa, if you want to intervene, I also have a very specific question from Shota Kakabadze. Yeah. He was referring to the issue of the war and political polarization, whether the recent military conflict and tensions with Azerbaijan has decreased the polarization between the parties, or has actually increased the gap?
Right. Thank you for the two questions, and I should concur Nino's observation that the topics, particularly policy topics, are not the issue of polarization. In Armenian reality, and they rarely are, because when these are policy issues and these are mature forces, or even not that mature, but they have their position on policy positions, then they can engage in discussion and find solutions. So polarization in Armenian reality is very interesting in a sense. It doesn't reflect in the society yet. Yet is the key word here. The society is much less polarized around the issues that are abused for polarization in politics. The main reason, the main driver of polarization is the revanchist intolerance to losing the power. So the polarization started on any issue, particularly by this revanchist small group fueled from not very democratic allies of Armenia, but also very much by the media resources that this former regime still had. Unfortunately, it wouldn't have been any problem to overcome it, given the societal support for change. However, the government, immature government, probably very new government, succumbed to this divisive politics. The issues were primarily two: the democracy, undermining democratic change, and security, juxtaposing these two. Obviously, the war has not, it has and it has not. Unfortunately, I won't be able to have very confident answer in reflected in numbers when I debate has and has not increased the polarization. Of course, the fact that this former regime representatives with a very zero-sum game, as was mentioned by Nino, approach appeared in the parliament, gave them much more validity and space for promoting their narratives. However, again, it wouldn't be that much of a issue if the institutions had been reformed and if the government stayed on course of the reform rather than refrained from democracy, human rights, civil society. So in that sense, in the sense of this very aggressive opposition, it has increased the gap and made it much more vicious, much more assertive, the opposition, because they have this narrative: see, your democracy led us to the defeat and the war and defeat. However, I have to say, and this is where I refer to a number of research that had not been yet published, so I wouldn't make the reference because it's not my research, that surprisingly, societal perception of this very tough issue of security is very consolidated around indeed the need to seek international guarantees and international resolution for peace. This is really extremely very important because that's the only way we can get to accountable peace. And it is also very important because to really make this internationalization step a very big step, you need consolidated support of the citizenry. So if I could respond to both questions, but I would be happy to clarify if needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. Now, Mihai, if you want, you can address, you can single out one of the topics, a part of what you have mentioned already now. But let me first ask you about the aspects of conflict settlement, Transnistrian conflict settlement, reintegration of the country. How is perceived this topic within the society in Moldova? Does it has an element of polarization there, or is it more something that that has a common vision in terms of this issue?
I think that with regard to the reintegration of the country, I think we have mostly a common vision across the society that the reintegration needs to be done as soon as possible. We need to come up with a strategy, with a vision regarding the reintegration of Moldova. But in the same time, I think that we need to mention that nowadays the reintegration is not anymore a top priority for the Moldovan society. According to the polls, the reintegration of the country is on the 8th place in the key priorities of the Moldovan people. Of course, after, for example, poor living standards, access to education, to sanitary health system, and so on. And that's this number actually says a lot about the low capacity, or maybe the limited efforts that were invested, especially in the last years, in order to advance on the on finding and promoting a political settlement vision for the Transnistrian region, and this thing didn't happen because across the parliament, across the political parties in the parliament in the last years, of course, there was not a unique vision and unique strategy on how to develop and how to promote a political settlement strategy for the Transnistrian conflict. I think we can identify here the polarization element within the political system. I think we have parties, especially the so-called pro-Russian parties, kind of identified as pro-East parties in Moldova that have a different vision on how to pursue the reintegration of the country. And it's only element to mention here is that, for example, Igor Dodon, the previous president of Moldova, considered that the reintegration of the country should happen after the withdrawal of the Russian troops, or before the withdrawal of the Russian troops actually from the Moldovan territory, and he mentioned that during the UN General Assembly. And of course, the nowadays, for example, government nowadays president has a totally different vision and said very clear that the withdrawal of the Russian troops needs to be done before the reintegration of the country and not afterwards. Because the reintegration cannot happen within the current situation in which on that territory we have foreign troops, military troops, and unfortunately the whole process is affected by that. But I would only shortly mention here that I focused on three issues that kind of triggered the polarization in Moldova, but all of these three issues, the access to and the promotion of the education, the learning of the Romanian language and the Russian, Bulgarian, Gagauz, and other ethnic minority languages across the country, the disinformation trends, the political discourse, all of this issues are interfered kind of. They have a direct effect on each other, and I think that's why the government and the parliament should have a concrete vision and strategy on how to work in the same time in order to solve all of them basically, and to promote a common vision for all of these issues and join the efforts to work on all these aspects.
Thank you, Mihai. Let me turn to you, given the question of Shota. What about Abkhazia and South Ossetia? Does it have potential to unite or divide the society in Georgia today?
Yes, it would be really a good one pole around which the Georgian society as well as political elites could consolidate. Officially, in the state strategies like occupation issues are on the first place usually, but this is mostly only on the paper, even in the approaches of the society as well. Because if you look at the public opinion surveys, the Abkhazia as well as South Ossetia issues, they are somewhere on the 4th or 5th. I'm not sure if I'm correct, but at least they are not on the top among the main problems for the Georgian society for now, at least for the respondents of the public opinion surveys. So in terms of official strategy, this is exactly the issue around which we have, of course, potential to consolidate, which is #1 challenge, security challenge, political challenge for the country. But in terms of practicing this issue, in terms of translating into the state policies to activate discussions about it, political discussions, public discussions, we don't see any signs for at least potential we can see, but for now, I don't think that it is in a short-term period. We cannot perceive this issue as the main consolidating issue of the society as well as the political elites. But what I have to say here, which is, I think, also important, is that mainly those like occupied territories is mostly like tied to their relations with Russia and Russian-Georgian relations, is already something that on one hand consolidates the societal discourse around the like enhancing our security policy and strategy and Russian soft power, its influence increasing in Georgia. But on the other hand, in terms of strategies as well of the parties, for example, strategies of the UNM and strategies of the GD, they still differ despite of the fact that it is a common challenge for the common spot of the national interest of the country. So this is also something that unites mostly the Georgian society, which is closely related with Abkhazia as well as South Ossetia in the minds of Georgian political elites as well as the public. So in short, yes, it is existing a big potential of having Abkhazia and South Ossetia issues as the main consolidating factor of Georgian society.
Thank you, Nina. We are approaching to the concluding part of our workshop. I still just turn to participants. Those who are watching us online on Facebook as well, please feel free to address the questions. We'll pick them up and address them to the panelists before they conclude. And also the participants here in Zoom, please raise hands or just mention that in the chat that you would like to comment or would like to address a quick question. Let me turn now to Renata. Renata, you would you like to have a comment or address some questions to our panelists, please?
Do we have time for the final questions?
We do.
All right, then I will use this privilege really of talking live, and I have a couple of questions to our Armenian and Moldovan speakers. Ms. Minasian, you were talking about the challenges for the reforms in the heightened security environment, and I wanted to ask about the civil society. To what extent it can work effectively in such environment, and what are the challenges that you see or the opportunities right now for the civil society to promote and strengthen the democracy reforms and will somehow mitigate this polarization. I also had a question to Mihai and a comment as well, because listening to the your presentation about disinformation. It really correlates with the situation that we have probably in a number of countries. In Georgia, definitely so. The ethnic minorities are more susceptible to certain disinformation campaigns. We see it very clearly in terms of pandemic management and also political issues. So I wanted to ask you if you see any opportunities to bridge the gap with the ethnic minorities in terms of disinformation. What could be done? You mentioned collaboration at the European level or some new initiatives. Would that be the way, or anything else that we could think about? Yeah, probably I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. Larissa, would you like to start?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for questions. A very good one indeed, because by virtue of past life, I see civil society as key in so many things, and particularly here. The potentials in two dimensions are two, I would say. This is a democratic country, and civil society, unlike the previous regime, can function not only freely but also meaningfully, in a way that it's not marginalized by any means that we had been before. The potential in terms of the realities, the political realities, I would rather call them the musts for civil society, the enhanced or augmented role of civil society in the absence of political discourse, in the incapacity to really formulate the agenda, political agenda, reform agenda, and in fact, countries' trajectory, the urge, the demand for civil society and public policymakers is really enhanced, that they need to take on this task. And here, of course, this is unsurmountable for purely civil society, but the good thing is that we haven't lost the majority public yet. They're disgusted by the partisan discourse, and basically not even partisan, but accusatory discourse that is going on. But the multiplicity of problems urges people to be aware. The security problem is existential. So people are still aware, and mounting really meaningful political discourse, really presenting agenda, is of critical importance. And here I ask and would like to solicit EU's and the Western support for really assisting in that, not only through financial or media or other terms, but also expertise, also catalytic role in this, but primarily in engaging in to security issues. If this happens, then civil society, some part of it, have really the capacity, more than the opposition or, unfortunately, the consolidated government, to present the agenda, to hold the government accountable to that agenda. So indeed, you nailed it. I see very critical role and capacity for civil society.
Thank you, Larissa. Mihai, I'll turn to you. And actually, while answering to the question of Renata, I also would invite you to start the concluding remarks part of our event, please.
Thank you, Iulian. I think that in order to bridge the gap kind of between the ethnic minority groups and the Moldovan majority group, it's important to promote at least two actions. The first one would be to limit, I think, the informational content that comes from Russian from the Russian TV channels operating here in Moldova. We had this experience at the beginning of 2018 when the parliament voted the so-called anti-propaganda law. However, I think this law could be better named the external anti-propaganda law, because at that time, even if the parliament actually limited the informational content and actually banned the news shows, the news and informational programs coming from Russia. At the same time, the impact of the local national propaganda was not limited at all. And I think that nowadays it's important to look at what other countries, for example, did in order to limit the disinformation coming from Russia, how to fight against it, and develop actually a smart policy in this regard. Not only just to ban it because you want to do it, but also to explain to the public how disinformation actually affects the national security of the country. For example, affects some society issues, affects the people mindset, and try to be as transparent and try to promote a dialogue in this regard. And I think a second action that needs to be implemented is, of course, to fight against internal disinformation and propaganda. And in the Moldovan case, it's very important to depoliticize the monitoring bodies. The audiovisual council, that although was functional in the last years, didn't apply some restrictions or some sanctions for the TV channels, for the online media that was promoting fake news, disinformation, and so on. Also, we have the National Information Service, who is also habilitated to act in this regard. And I think that these institutions need to be depoliticized and empowered to act, encouraged to be as independent as possible and act in order to fight against the disinformation and propaganda trends in Moldova that are affecting everyone, not only the ethnic minorities. And just to conclude, I would like to thank you once again to the organizers of this event, and I would like to maybe continue this dialogue, which I think is key. Which I think is key for our countries, which I think is key for the future of the Eastern Partnership. The polarization issue in Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, and Armenia, it's an issue of I think it's an issue of national security, and needs to be perceived through the lens of national security. The institutions working in this area need to have more instruments to act, and need to be encouraged and habilitated, empowered to act for consolidating basically the democracy in our countries, because the end result of any polarization actions is affecting clearly the democracy, the electoral democracy, the participatory democracy in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihai. Nona, would you like to have your concluding remarks?
If it was me, yeah. Well, thank you very much for organizers as well as the speakers from Armenia and Moldova for very engaging insights for how the different aspects of polarization in different societies, different types of societies can be addressed. Even for Georgia, it might be absolutely applicable in terms of grabbing the new insights, how we can escape from the trap which creates the long-lasting crisis and deadlock of the hindered democratic processes in the country. So I think that this joint discussion and joint exchange of the ideas, at least for me as the analyst in Georgia who is looking and observing at the political processes in one country only in terms of this concrete research, I think that exchanging those new ideas will crucially important for enriching the strategies and visions about how we can escape from the traps. So thank you for this meeting.
Thank you for your remarks, Nino. Larissa?
Yes, not much to say apart that I think current world shows that this is beyond our regional, even if you consider Eastern Europe problem. Polarization, partisan politics, and intolerance are on rise even in much more democratic countries with much deeper democratic tradition, and the rule of majority is turning to rule of polarized minorities, not in one place around the world. So this is indeed a very pertinent problem in the rise of social media, misinformation, disinformation, and massive propaganda worldwide narratives that are circulated that we see. So, but for our countries with much less experience in democratic practice and experience of resilience of population, as was said, I think this is indeed becoming a very national security problem. And we, the more we talk to each other, the more we listen to each other and find the ways to cope. I would hardly say to overcome it, but to cope and engage people in meaningful discussion, discourse, and increase their belief in their citizenry, their agency to implement change, I think the better off we will be. And so I wholeheartedly join the thanks for organizing of this event and inviting me to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larissa. Now, before ending this workshop, let me turn to Stepan, Cornelia, Renata, if you want to say a few words at the end before I will conclude. Stepan?
Thank you very much. I want to say thank you very much for our experts for very interesting presentations. It represents us, the problems who are developing in our countries, and very important for us to listen Moldovan and Georgian experts' view. We can compare. Thank you very much for all our very interesting experts from Armenia, Moldova, and Georgia.
Thank you, Stepan. Cornelia, Renata?
I will take the floor. Thank you. I will just join Stepan in my thanks to all the panelists today, to also all the participants who stayed with us, asked questions, participated, listened, and it was very interesting and challenging, right? And this is already the second discussion of the series that we've had during the project, and it today just showed once again how important it is to find time to meet and talk to our partners as well, because sometimes we get so busy with talking to Brussels that it's we might forget to see around, to look around, and to see that there are very similar challenges actually right next door. And I really look forward to the last event that will be organized by IPRE, and cannot wait to attend that after the New Year's break. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renata. Thank you for organizing this event. Thank you to all panelists. I would like to thank all panelists for the presentations, for the discussions, for the answers you provided, and also, of course, the participants who have been active and stayed with us both online and here via Zoom. Just to conclude and say, indeed, we are working towards next year already, the third workshop, which we will host. Would like to focus on the rule of law and justice developments in our countries and see ways, I mean, do an assessment where we are, find comparisons, find lessons learned, and maybe initiatives from think tanks and CSOs, which would help to ensure greater accountability of this process, so that reforms and ensure more justice in our countries. So that will be the topic of our next workshop next year. Once again, thanks to the Dutch Embassy, to the Dutch government for supporting this extraordinary initiative that I really, really like. Indeed, talking to partners in the region is very interesting. That's something that we are looking forward always and happy to do. And I'm really happy that we have on board our Armenian colleagues, which goes beyond our agenda with Georgia and Ukraine in terms of the association deal that shapes more and more now towards the summit and after. It's another indication that Eastern Partnership is still an inclusive policy that helps and works and includes other partners, including Armenia. Thank you once again to all of you. Looking forward to see you next year. You'll hear from us. Until that, stay safe, stay healthy, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.